All right. As of 2020, private equity employs an astounding 11.7 million people in the United States alone. All right, so quick show of hands. Who can you raise your hand if you're familiar with the film that this picture is from? Well, for those of you who don't know, this movie is The Truman Show. The main idea of The Truman Show is that a man, Truman, is given a set of ideas and is living inside of a bubble. In order to break out of this bubble, he has to break free from these ideas and become fully aware of his surroundings. This is what we will be doing in this presentation today. There are a certain set of ideals and regulations around that people ascertain as to Wall Street. Today, we'll be breaking through these by showing what private equity really does and its role in the economy. So, what exactly is private equity? Private equity is simply a way to invest in private companies rather than publicly traded ones. So, publicly traded ones would refer to companies in the stock market. As in order to survive in a free market economy, companies have to interact with one another by either shares and ownership of a company. But most people just think of the publicly traded companies. Private companies tend to be much larger in absolute value and also play an incredible role in our economy. So here are a few terms that we needed to become familiar with before we get started. The first one is a leveraged buyout, an LBO. This is the acquisition of a company using mostly borrowed money. So in this case of private equity firms, they have a portfolio of certain companies that they own all at once. Now, these companies can be anywhere from $250,000 to sometimes these companies are in the billions. Now, these private equity firms do not have valuations in the billions, meaning that they have to borrow money in order to fund these upfront costs. Another key term is venture capital. While venture capital firms can be their own separate firm, it's the mass investment in a startup company and still falls under the private equity umbrella and still is valuable to this presentation. On the other hand, long-term private equity is capital that tends to be allocated in at least a decade-long contract. So these tend to be huge mergers, particularly in the oil industry, that require much governmental procedures in order to avoid big monopolies and mergers, as going on in the Panhandle currently. Here are some key points for this presentation. It increases productivity for society. Private equity also reduces consumer costs in the case of mergers and acquisitions, or just M&A, and drives a higher allocation of capital throughout the board. Initially, private equity increases productivity for society. So private equity firms take inefficient companies and merge them together. So in the case of most private equity firms, they take poorly managed or inefficient companies and merge them with each other. So a great example of this would be the energy industry. In the energy industry, there is a high amount of governmental regulations put in place by the Fed or the federal state. And in this case, small energy companies trying to break into this field cannot keep up with the amount of government regulations put in place, meaning that a private equity firm is able to buy this energy company and merge them with another energy company, or just have them connect with each other and make it easier for both companies to have uniform state regulations across the board, making it easier to provide. A study done by the Goldman Sachs Investment Banking Division states that there is a percentage increase of 6% after 6 months of a governmental regulatory caused merger in the energy industry. This is not just due to market swings. Since it is after 6 months, this is a standard regulatory action across the board, providing considerable benefit to these companies. It also private equity purchases also affect employees who contribute to society in turn, and then in the economy. This boosts employee efficiency and also gains greater access to capital through private equity. This aligns the incentives of the employees since they are all in one. So if these companies are in contact with each other, and in some cases even merged, then they have similar incentives and goals, meaning that the industry can move forward into one particular direction. Another key point is that private equity reduces consumer costs. So private equity firms are a significant contributor to consumer prices nationwide due to how many mergers are initiated by private equity. So it utilizes advanced management techniques and leverages the scale of these multi-million dollar, in some cases billion-dollar companies. One example of this is KFC. KFC is owned by a much larger company that owns several other large, prominent fast food companies, meaning that private equity, in some cases, has taken control of several of these companies and made a monopoly across the board by setting different standards for each company while still maintaining a domination of the market. While doing this legally, it provides much benefit to the private equity firm without creating a legal monopoly that would get taken over by the government or dispersed at some point. So in this case, this gave shareholders a huge returns, allowing fewer options to execute at a higher quality and scale. So in the case of utilized advanced management techniques, private equity would when they take over a company in terms of a merger, they would put inside their own executive branch inside the company rather than shareholders. In a public company, you can buy stock in a company, giving you a voice in small ownership of a company. In a private company, it is owned by a select few that have more of a exact and have more interest in the company, meaning that they do their due diligence and have an incentive to increase the value of the company, whereas a stock, you can go on to a company and buy stock for a few dollars. And it does not mean you truly care about the goals and incentives of the company. On the other hand, it leverages scale. A lot of times these private equity firms have billion-dollar portfolios, allowing them to pull from several different companies and industries, helping their other clients. Lastly, private equity firms drives greater allocation of capital. So in this case, private venture capital, which still falls under the umbrella of private equity, brings in new money and sustains the economy. So while mergers and acquisitions are limited, venture capital can fund a company and maintain the economy. So a common example of venture capital in more of a microeconomic scale would be something like Shark Tank. A new startup would come to a venture capital firm asking for seed money, startup money, for their product or service, allowing them to become more sustainable and continue developing their product. This brings new innovation to the economy and provides new services and provides new services that have been vetted and will survive. While capital allocation increases, it prevents idle funds. So these funds, rather than sitting in a bank account, just sitting idle, waiting for a small increase, these are be putting towards new companies and new innovation to the market. So while they're expanding, it reaches a greater market share, providing these services to more people and providing greater allocation of capital. So in the end, these early stage startups need 6 to 8 figure capital in order to reduce risk and receive private equity firms' attention. So a study done by JP Morgan Investment Banking Division says a startup that accepts venture capital and follows the process directly receives a large sum of money, advice, and connections in exchange for a small piece of their company. And this small piece of their company can later be sold and given to another investor as well, making this not a significant downgrade for the company. On the other hand, many people criticize private equity because in many instances, when a company is bought, it involves job reductions. So a study performed by the Goldman Sachs IB division states, one hypothesis is that private equity partly creates value, in part by extracting surplus from employees by cutting amenities, reducing job security, and increasing demands on workers. Employees often need more efficient layoffs. So when former employees publicly criticize layoffs, the company's image suffers. It's like a pirate capturing their opponent, taking everything worthwhile, and then throwing them back out into the wild, not being able to fend for themselves. Now, this does not take into consideration the fact that ultimately, less productive companies will fail in the long run. Several factors are crucial when a private equity transaction involves staff layoffs to maximize firms' funds. Assume a company benefits from reducing staff. There tends to be more other fundamental flaws that lay underneath the company's surface if reducing their workforce is the proper way to maximize efficiency. Meaning, even if they do not lay off workers, these less productive companies end up collapsing. This allows leverage buyouts to concentrate firm ownership among private equity managers, allowing shareholders to witness and fight executive failure. When millions of people own shares in a company, they may feel weak in their ownership and may not monitor the company's success and ongoing trends. But in the case of private equity, ownership. It is given to a select few management experienced investors, a board, or executives in the company's lifespan. Reducing staff may be a favorable decision since private equity has a concentrated pool of invested parties, since a company can make quick and accurate managerial changes. Moving on, many people also criticize private equity to the reduction in marketplace choices, since the lag choice purchase variable often has the intended consequences when purchasing a company. So private equity firms end up often reducing the marketplace choices because they merge companies together. That is their main goal. Large mergers or acquisitions of similar enterprises might lower pricing. So when this indicates a need for more competitiveness, similar price enterprises might charge more because less competition implies more control, which can raise prices immediately. So a structure-based model requires a vast theoretical framework to describe and analyze the relationship between past purchases and current picks, making it complicated, since the relationship between competition and large business rivals is often convoluted, but it makes a strong case against private equity. On the other hand, consolidation reduces costs by forcing the market to allow options for low-end consumers. This compels the market to offer low-end options for clients, countering the claim that private equity firms decrease marketplace choices and harm the economy. Consolidation creates companies of scale. Scaling a business upwards lowers the average cost creating a product or service, making long-term costs more feasible. This allows corporations to cut prices. This dramatically improves manufacturing efficiency in the supply chain and eliminate inefficiencies. A common example of this in a microeconomic scale is the Swedish company Ericsson, which has developed a small cellular telephone system that local operators can use for cell phone service to a small area at a radically lower cost than conventional details. So condensing resources after integrating with other cellular telecommunications companies allows it to dominate the market. This example shows how private equity can benefit low-end consumers by providing options for all expanding market possibilities. Finally, many people criticize private equity by the way their capital is used for high-risk deals. Many people say that private equity is inefficient use of funds and is too risky and is immature. But in this case, successful entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates shape and reevaluate the business environment through their innovation. They contribute most from their businesses, yet they often leave other companies to fend them for themselves in a capitalist system. So according to annual standard venture capital data, most brick-and-mortar enterprises are hurt or terminated by rapid technological advances, similar to AI. Many enterprises closed, reducing market options. Consolidation or disruption of these organizations could limit client options and modern market competitiveness. In actuality, carried interest introduces complex hidden incentives for a company. And what I say to this? Investment is built off the idea of risk and reward. That is, you have to take a risk in the case of these million and billion dollar evaluations given to companies in order to bring in the profit necessary. As previously stated, the common argument against private equity is that it's immature to use these funds in such a drastic and risky way. But many people forget that a basic rule of investment is just this interaction between risk and reward. As stated by legendary economist Bill Sharp, a private equity firm takes risks only when potential for failure is calculated and based on the ability to add value. So most critics of prominent private equity firms are investors whose expertise is limited to public markets. Private markets, on the other hand, have a completely different risk tolerance level and are less fragile due to their inactive nature compared to public markets that have investors all over the place. So overall, the balance of risk and reward in private equity is skewed through the lens of a public market investor, but is corrected for the whole new side of the market. So, while assessing the current state of private equity, it is critical to recognize the significance of biblical integration in the workplace. As organizations handle the considerable wealth, the demand for stewardship is constant. So, in this case, Matthew 25:21 is the parable of the talents. For those of you who don't know, a master has 3 servants. He gives a sum of money to each of his servants, all the exact same amount, and said, go forth and be fruitful with your money. 2 of them go out and make the most of their experience and opportunity with the wealth entrusted to them, and return much time later, and their master is pleased with them, saying, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. But the 3rd servant ends up bearing his money and coming back with the exact same, and does not take a risk, and it comes back with the exact same money as the amount entrusted to him. In the case of private equity, we cannot just let a simple checking account or savings account take over our money, and rather we need to invest in innovation and future than money that can be utilized to provide benefit to the economy rather than just lying idle. Because of severe employee layoffs, the severe nature of employee layoffs, many critics advocate for a more sympathetic approach to failing when a company fails. While employees' emotional state should not be neglected, of course, firm must prioritize the safety and longevity of the company and behave logically to survive and benefit the economy. So overall, the balance of risk and reward has ushered in a new area of long-term private equity, providing a considerable benefit to market conditions. Thank you.